Jasmine Taylor stared in disbelief at the settlement check. $20 million. Just 6 months earlier, her 14-year-old son, Andre, had been brutally tased on Flight 1372, all for the simple act of asking to use the restroom. Now, this airline would never forget the day they crossed Samuel Taylor's son. Before we unpack this shocking story, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your location in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories of everyday people standing tall against injustice. Now, let's revisit how a routine flight turned into a landmark civil rights case that shook an entire industry. The morning of June 15th started like any other for the Taylor family. Andre Taylor, a bright, polite, 14-year-old honor student, was excitedly packing his carry-on for his very first flight. He triple-checked his packing list, making sure he had his headphones, books, and the travel journal his father had gifted him to document the journey. "Mom, do you think the clouds look different from above?" Andre asked, his brown eyes shining with curiosity as he zipped up his backpack. Jasmine Taylor smiled at her son as she adjusted her nurse's watch, readying herself for their trip to Boston. This mother-son getaway was a special one, a chance to visit the prestigious universities Andre dreamed of attending someday. Harvard, Boston College, all within reach for a student with his impeccable academic record. "I wish Dad could come with us," Andre added, his excitement dimming for a moment. "He would be here if he could," Jasmine reassured him. "But you know how important this case is to him." Samuel Taylor, Andre's father, was one of Atlanta's most respected civil rights attorneys, known for defending victims of racial discrimination. That morning, he was preparing for a critical hearing in a class action lawsuit against a major corporation accused of discriminatory hiring practices. "He'll join us in 3 days," Jasmine reminded Andre, just in time for our campus tour. Samuel kissed his wife and son goodbye, promising to call after his hearing. "Remember everything you see, Andre," he said with a wink. "I want a full report when I get there." The drive to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was smooth, and check-in went off without a hitch. As they waited at the gate, Andre, or T, people watched, jotting down notes in his journal about the diverse crowd around them. When boarding for Sky High Airways, Flight 1372 was announced, Jasmine and Andre joined the line. The boarding process seemed routine. First class and priority passengers boarded first. When their group was called, they made their way down the JETWAY dot at the aircraft door. A flight attendant, with a practiced plastic smile, greeted passengers. "Welcome aboard," she chirped to a middle-aged white couple ahead of them. When the couple mentioned it was their anniversary trip, the attendant, her NAMA tag reading Brenda Wilson, lit up, congratulating them and promising a special dessert during the meal service. But when Jasmine and Andre reached the door, Brenda's smile vanished. "Boarding passes," she said curtly, holding out her hand without making eye contact. No warm greeting, no kind words for their trip. Andre noticed the coldness but kept quiet as they made their way to their seats. In row 24, settling in, Andre quietly observed Brenda's interactions with other passengers. He noticed how her warmth seemed reserved for white travelers, while her tone turned clipped and commanding when speaking to black passengers or others of color. "Did you notice that?" Andre whispered to his mother, his sharp instincts catching the subtle discrimination. Jasmine nodded faintly. "Just focus on enjoying your first flight, honey. Some people carry their biases wherever they go." As the crew finished pre-flight preparations, Andre busied himself studying the safety card, memorizing the emergency exits and procedures. The plane taxied out, lifted off, and soon the Atlanta skyline shrank beneath them at cruising altitude. The seat belt sign switched off. Andre was captivated by the scenery from his window seat. Patchworks of fields, silver rivers winding below, and cottony clouds now beneath them, an hour into the flight. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Folks, we're expecting a bit of turbulence ahead. I'm turning the seatbelt sign back on. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Andre, having been sipping apple juice, felt an urgent need to use the restroom. He tried waiting, shifting in his seat, as the minutes dragged by. The seatbelt sign stayed on, though no turbulence had arrived. To his surprise, Andre noticed several passengers disregarding the warning and getting up to use the lavatory anyway. The restroom door ahead opened, and a white teenage boy about Andre's age emerged. Moments earlier, he'd stood up during the seatbelt sign and gone to the bathroom without issue. Brenda, the flight attendant, had said nothing. After another 15 agonizing minutes, Andre couldn't hold it any longer. Glancing at his mother, who was absorbed in her book, he quietly unfastened his seatbelt and stood. He carefully made his way into the aisle, steadying himself against the seatbacks before he could take more than a few steps. Brenda appeared in front of him, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "The seatbelt sign is on," she snapped. "Return to your seat immediately." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Andre replied politely. "I really need to use the restroom. I saw others going, so I thought it would be okay." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "I won't tell you again. Sit down now." Andre, confused by the double standard, discreetly gestured toward the lavatory, where the white teenager was just returning to his seat. "But that boy just went, and you didn't stop him." "I'll be quick, I promise." A flicker of something cold and angry crossed Brenda's face. Her nostrils flared, and her lips tightened into a hard line, as the teenager passed without comment or consequence. Brenda's expression darkened. "Are you questioning my authority?" she demanded, raising her voice just enough to turn nearby heads. "No, ma'am," Andre said, shrinking under the growing attention. "I just really need to go to the bathroom." Noticing the escalating tension, Jasmine set down her book and rose from her seat. "Excuse me," she began. "My son simply needs to—" Brenda cut her off with a raised hand. "Ma'am, I need your son to comply with safety regulations. The seatbelt sign is on." Passengers nearby began to watch the confrontation. A middle-aged black man in a cardigan frowned as he followed the exchange. A white woman nearby whispered to her husband. Andre stood frozen, unsure of what to do, his face a mix of embarrassment and confusion. "I'm sorry if I did something wrong," he said softly. "I just don't understand why." Brenda's hand moved toward her pocket, and the air in the cabin seemed to tighten as passengers sensed the situation spiraling. In a flash, she pulled out a small black device. Before anyone could react, she pointed it at Andre and pressed the button. Two metal prongs shot out, trailing thin wires. Striking Andre squarely in the chest, the boy's body went rigid as 50,000 volts surged through him. His eyes widened in pain and terror, a strangled cry escaping his throat before his muscles seized violently. "Andre!" Jasmine screamed, lunging toward her son as his body collapsed into the aisle, twitching uncontrollably. The sharp smell of ozone filled the air, mingling with fear and disbelief. "Oh my God, she tased him. She tased that child." A woman shrieked from the back. Phones appeared in hands as passengers began filming the horrific scene. The white teenager who had used the restroom moments earlier stood pale and speechless. After what felt like a lifetime but lasted only seconds, Brenda released the trigger. Andre lay motionless, small tremors running through his body, a dark wet stain spreading across his jeans from the involuntary loss of bladder control. Jasmine dropped to her knees beside him, her nurse's training pushing through the horror. Andre, can you hear me?" she pleaded, her fingers finding his pulse, which thudded wildly beneath his skin. "Stay back, ma'am," Brenda barked, still holding the taser. He was becoming aggressive and non-compliant. "He's 14, Jasmine cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He needed to use the bathroom. What is wrong with you?" The black man in the cardigan rose from his seat, fury written across his face. "I saw the whole thing," he announced, his voice ringing through the silent cabin. "That boy did nothing wrong." "Sir, please remain seated," Brenda ordered, but her voice wavered. A white man in a business suit spoke up. He was questioning her instructions. "In times like these, you can't be too careful with potential threats." "Threats?" the man in the cardigan shot back. "He's a child who needed to use the restroom. What kind of threat did you perceive?" Andre's eyes flickered open, pain and confusion clouding his face. "Mom," he croaked. "What happened?" Jasmine cradled his head, her heart breaking at the sight of him. "I'm here, baby. I've got you." A man in a blazer pushed through the crowd. "Air Marshal Trevor Henderson," he announced, flashing a badge. But instead of addressing Brenda and her unauthorized use of force, he turned to Andre. "Son, I need you to remain calm and follow instructions." "Are you kidding me?" Jasmine spat, disbelief etched in her voice. "My son was just assaulted. He needs medical help, not more threats." Andre tried to sit up, his body still jerking from aftershocks. Humiliation washed over him as he became aware of the wetness on his pants and the stares of dozens of passengers. He bit back tears, his father's words echoing in his mind. "Never let them see you broken." The flight attendant perceived a threat and acted according to her training. Marshal Henderson claimed, though doubt flickered in his eyes as he glanced at the taser still in Brenda's grip. "Training," the man in the cardigan challenged. "I've been flying 40 years. I've never seen a flight attendant carrying a taser, let alone using one on a child. My name is Walter Green, 30 years as a high school principal. I know threatening behavior when I see it, and this boy was no threat." More passengers voiced their opinions. Some defended Brenda, citing the need for security and rule enforcement. Others were outraged at the obvious racial double standard. "I saw that white kid use the bathroom when the seatbelt sign was on, and she didn't say a word to him," a Latina woman called out from the back. The captain's voice cut through the chaos via intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an incident in the cabin, we'll be making an emergency landing in Philadelphia. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes." As the plane began its descent, Jasmine gently helped Andre back to their seats. His hands trembled, his face pale. Jasmine's heart ached at the haunted look in his eyes far older than they had been just hours before. With shaking fingers, she pulled out her phone and sent a text to Samuel. "Emergency. Andre tased by flight attendant on plane 4, trying to use bathroom. Landing in Philadelphia. Need you now." She attached a video link another passenger had already uploaded online in an Atlanta courtroom. Samuel Taylor's phone buzzed during a recess. He glanced down, his blood turning to ice, as the footage of his convulsing son played on screen. Without a word, he gathered his papers and strode out of the courtroom, already booking a flight to Philadelphia. Back on flight 1372, Andre leaned against the window, silent tears tracing down his cheeks as the clouds passed below. His first flight had become a waking nightmare, and somewhere inside him, a grim realization was taking root. In America, even the sky wasn't safe for a black boy. The wheels screeched against the tarmac as Flight 1372 touched down at Philadelphia International Airport. The plane finally rolled to a stop, far from the main terminal. Through the windows, passengers could see police cruisers and ambulances clustered on the tarmac, their lights flashing against the dull gray afternoon sky. "Well, would you look at that response time?" muttered Walter Green, the retired principal, who'd defended Andre. "Funny how fast they show up when it's a black kid being accused instead of protected." The seatbelt sign chimed off, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, for your safety, please remain seated. Local authorities will be boarding the aircraft shortly. We appreciate your continued patience and cooperation." Jasmine gripped Andre's hand, her jaw tight with resolve, though her stomach churned with fear. Years of advocating for vulnerable patients in the healthcare system had steeled her for tense situations. But this was her son. Andre sat slumped in his seat, still trembling from the shock, his gaze locked on the seat back in front of him. Moments later, the cabin door opened. 4 Philadelphia police officers boarded the plane, followed by 2 Sky High Airways representatives in pressed Navy suits. Brenda hurried over to them, speaking quickly, gesturing toward Andre. The lead officer, a broad-shouldered man with a crew cut, strode down the aisle and stopped at row 24. "Are you Andre Taylor?" he asked, his hand resting near his holster. Before Andre could speak, Jasmine stood. "My son needs medical attention," she said firmly. "He was assaulted with a taser by your flight attendant for trying to use the restroom." "Ma'am," the officer replied, his tone dismissive, "we've received reports of an unruly passenger who became aggressive and threatened a crew member. I need your son to come with us." Walter rose again, voice steady, despite the tension. "That's not what happened. The boy did nothing wrong. Check the video footage, dozens of us recorded it." The officer barely spared him a glance. "Sir, please remain seated. We'll take statements later." Then, to the horror of Jasmine and Andre, the officer reached for a pair of handcuffs. "Stand up, son. Hands behind your back." Jasmine stepped between them. "You're arresting him. He's the victim here. We're detaining him while we sort this out," the officer replied, though the distinction meant little as he reached for Andre's wrists again. Jasmine didn't move. "He needs a doctor, not handcuffs. I'm a registered nurse, and he's showing signs of cardiac stress from an electrical shock. Ma'am, if you interfere with this detention, I'll have to place you under arrest too," the officer warned. Walter moved fully into the aisle, his phone raised. "I'm recording this. That boy needs a doctor, and he needs his rights protected." Several other passengers followed suit, lifting their phones. "We saw what happened. A white woman in a business," Suit called out. The flight attendant was completely out of line. The standoff continued until a second officer stepped forward. "We'll take him to the hospital under guard," he said, "but he's coming with us." Jasmine nodded stiffly. "Then I'm going with him. He's a minor, and I'm his mother." They agreed, though it did little to lessen the injustice when they placed cold metal cuffs on Andre's wrists before escorting him off the plane. The sight of a trembling, handcuffed black teenager being led through the first-class cabin would soon circulate nationwide, one of the most powerful images of the incident. As they moved down the jet bridge, Jasmine looked back and saw Walter and several other passengers exchanging contact information, already organizing themselves as witnesses. Their quiet solidarity was the only bright spot in an otherwise dark moment. At the hospital, Andre was treated for taser exposure, while an officer stood guard outside his room. Doctors confirmed elevated cardiac markers and muscle damage consistent with high-voltage shock. Despite the findings, the officer outside still referred to Andre as the suspect. Meanwhile, the story spread across media outlets with wildly conflicting headlines. Some reported teen subdued after threatening flight attendant, while others more accurately read 14-year-old black teen tased after bathroom request, or airline accused of racial bias after tasing incident. Sky High Airways wasted no time releasing a statement. Sky High Airways supports our crew members' decisions in ensuring cabin safety. Our attendants are trained to respond to security threats according to established protocol. We are conducting an internal review of the incident, and the crew member involved has been placed on administrative leave with pay. Social media exploded. The hashtags #Justice for Andre and #IST and with Brenda trended simultaneously, exposing the deep racial fractures still alive in America. In a hospital corridor, Detective Kevin Morrison arrived, a veteran of the Philadelphia Police Department, with a reputation for quietly managing racially charged cases in ways that protected the department from liability. "Mrs. Taylor," he began, approaching Jasmine with practiced calm. "I know you're upset, but I think we can all agree it's best to resolve this quickly and quietly." Jasmine folded her arms, fury simmering beneath the surface. "My son was assaulted for trying to use the bathroom. There's nothing quick or quiet about my response." Morrison sighed and leaned in slightly. "Not everything is about race, ma'am. Kids act out. Flight crews have bad days. No need to blow this out of proportion." Jasmine didn't flinch. "My son was tased for doing what a white child did moments before, without consequence. If you don't think this is about race, you're either blind or complicit." The detective's expression hardened. "Mrs. Taylor, pursuing this could result in charges against your son. Interfering with a flight crew is a federal offense. Is that really the path you want to go down?" Before Jasmine could answer, a commanding voice cut through the hallway. "Are you threatening my client's son?" Detective Samuel Taylor stood at the far end of the corridor, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, despite having rushed from court. His presence seemed to shift the atmosphere in an instant. Jasmine moved to his side, drawing strength from his arrival. "Mr. Taylor," Morrison greeted, his tone forced neutral. "I was just explaining the potential complications, the only complication. Here is the blatant racial profiling and excessive force used against a minor," Samuel said evenly, though his voice carried steel. "Now, are you planning to arrest the flight attendant who assaulted my son, or should I contact the district attorney directly?" Morrison backpedaled slightly. "We're still gathering statements. These situations are rarely as clear-cut. They're crystal clear when a dozen passengers recorded the assault," Samuel shot back. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I need to see my son." As Morrison stepped aside, Samuel embraced Jasmine tightly before they entered Andre's hospital room together. The sight of Andre pale, weak, and connected to monitors nearly broke Samuel's composure. The boy's voice cracked as he reached for his father. "Dad." Samuel took his hand. "I'm here now, son," he said softly, "and I promise you they will answer for this." Later that evening, after Andre had been discharged with instructions for cardiac follow-ups, Samuel sat in their hotel room making calls, first to his law partners to clear his schedule, then to Eleanor Pierce, a former FBI agent turned private investigator. "Eleanor," he said as soon as she picked up, "I need everything you can dig up on Sky High Airways, their security protocols, and especially a Brenda Wilson. I mean everything." As he hung up, Samuel noticed Andre sitting silently by the hotel window, gazing out at the Philadelphia skyline. "Andre," Samuel said gently, "I want you to know, none of this is your fault." Andre turned, his young face marked by a haunted expression no child should have to wear. "But if I'd just stayed in my seat—" "No," Samuel cut him off, his voice both firm and kind. "You did nothing wrong. You have the same right to use that bathroom as anyone else on that plane. What happened to you was unjust, and we're going to make sure it never happens to another child." Andre nodded slowly, though Samuel could see the fear and doubt settling behind his son's eyes, seeds that words alone might never uproot. He knew then that Andre had witnessed firsthand what Samuel had spent his career fighting, the harsh reality that in America, a black child's ordinary actions could be weaponized into perceived threats. As Andre finally drifted into a restless sleep, Samuel's resolve crystallized. The system had bared its teeth at his son, but it had no idea what it had just awakened. The next morning dawned cold and gray over Philadelphia, matching the mood in the Taylor family's hotel suite. The situation was growing increasingly complicated. The facility kept trying to assign inappropriate staff to her mother's case. Inappropriate how? Margaret's voice sharpened with the practiced edge of someone who'd spent decades navigating delicate social hierarchies with ruthless precision. They're trying to assign a male caregiver, Catherine explained, watching her sister's face register the expected horror. I specifically requested female nurses only, but this man's been pushing to work with Mother, despite how uncomfortable she is with the idea. Margaret's expression hardened into the kind of steely resolve that had made her a quiet legend in the circles of country club politics. Absolutely unacceptable. Mother comes from a generation that understood certain boundaries, especially in matters of intimate care. Their conversation turned to familiar themes: propriety, natural order, the importance of maintaining the standards that had served their family for generations. Catherine absorbed her sister's approval like expensive perfume, each word reaffirming values she'd inherited alongside the family's silver. The problem with modern institutions, Margaret went on, is this foolish notion that anyone can provide proper care, regardless of background or refinement. Mother needs people who understand her world, her values, her expectations. Catherine nodded, remembering her mother's teachings about keeping a proper distance from service staff. I've been thinking about bringing her home, she confided, hiring private nurses who understand our family's standards. Margaret's face lit up. Now, that's the Richmond spirit. She deserves to spend her final months surrounded by people who truly appreciate her worth. Catherine raised her glass, feeling her resolve strengthen with every sip of wine that had been aging longer than most of the staff at Willowbrook. On Wednesday morning, Catherine returned to Willowbrook Manor with the grim determination of someone handling unpleasant business personally. The corridors smelled faintly of industrial disinfectant, barely disguised by cheap air fresheners. Her designer heels clicked sharply against linoleum floors, a reminder of why wealthy families needed better options. In the administrative office, she found Helen Morrison reviewing staff schedules with visible frustration, clearly struggling to meet Catherine's increasingly narrow demands while still covering patient care. Mrs. Richmond, Helen began carefully, I need to discuss your mother's care plan. We've had 3 different female nurses attempt to work with her this week, and each visit ended in severe agitation. Catherine's smile was razor-sharp, meant to cut through bureaucratic excuses. Perhaps the issue isn't my mother's condition, but your staff's inability to properly care for someone of her refinement. Mrs. Richmond, Helen said gently, your mother's Alzheimer's has progressed to the point where she often doesn't recognize family. Her agitation may have less to do with the staff and more to do with her condition. The words felt like a personal insult to Catherine's judgment, triggering the defensive anger that came so easily when her authority was questioned by those she considered social inferiors. I've known my mother for 38 years, she snapped. I understand her needs better than any medical chart. Through the office window, Catherine noticed an elderly black man in scrubs, helping a frail woman along the garden path. His movements were patient, his demeanor quietly kind, a surprising display of dignity and care. That's Marcus Williams, Helen said, following Catherine's gaze. If our other options don't work, he's scheduled to assist your mother this afternoon. He's remarkably skilled with patients in advanced memory care. Absolutely not, Catherine replied coldly. I've made my preferences clear. My mother requires caregivers who can relate to her world. Helen sighed, the weary sound of someone who'd fought this battle before. Marcus has calmed patients no one else could reach. His work speaks for itself. I'm sure he meets your usual standards, Catherine said, her tone making it clear those standards fell far short of what the Richmond family demanded. As Catherine gathered her purse to leave, she caught another glimpse of Marcus, still listening intently as an elderly woman recounted some tangled story. His expression held genuine interest, not the practiced patience of duty. For a fleeting moment, Catherine wondered what kind of man he was, but the thought passed quickly, dismissed as irrelevant. The following afternoon shattered Catherine's carefully maintained control. A crisis call from Willowbrook sent her racing to the manor, where chaos reigned in her mother's wing. Nurses hovered helplessly outside Eleanor Richmond's room as sounds of distress echoed through the wallpapered halls. "Thank God you're here," Helen breathed. "Your mother's having a severe episode. She's refusing care, won't eat, crying for hours. We've tried every female nurse on staff." Catherine pushed past them into the room. The sight of her once impeccable mother huddled in bed like a frightened child struck her like a physical blow. "Mother," she said, her voice trembling despite herself. "It's me, Catherine. I'm here now. Everything's all right." "But..." Eleanor's eyes held no recognition, only terror. Helen spoke softly from the doorway. "We have one more option. Marcus Williams is here. He's had remarkable success with patients in similar states." "Absolutely not," Catherine snapped, fear morphing into anger. "My mother needs someone who understands her, not a random male orderly who couldn't possibly relate to her." A deep, steady voice spoke behind her. "May I try?" Catherine turned to find Marcus Williams standing there, his presence somehow both calming and commanding. He was older than she expected, perhaps mid-50s, with graying hair and steady, perceptive eyes. "This is entirely inappropriate," she began, but the certainty in her voice faltered. Something about his demeanor made her objections sound. Petty dot, without waiting for permission, Marcus crossed the room in unhurried, deliberate steps. "Mrs. Richmond," he said gently, "my name's Marcus. I'm here to help you feel better." Slowly, Eleanor's agitation ebbed. Her breathing steadied as Marcus spoke to her with the kind of warmth and respect Catherine realized, in that moment, she herself hadn't offered. "You have beautiful hair." "Mrs. Richmond," Marcus murmured, "would you like me to help brush it? I bet it would make you feel more like yourself." Catherine stood frozen, watching as the man she'd dismissed eased her. Mother's suffering with nothing more than compassion and kindness, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't know what to say. Andre had slept fitfully, waking from nightmares where he was falling, electricity coursing through his body. Jasmine had barely slept at all, alternating between comforting her son and weeping quietly, a bitter mixture of rage and heartbreak. Samuel, however, had transformed overnight into a force of nature. While his family rested, he turned the suite's dining table into a makeshift command center, laptop open with a dozen research tabs, legal pads filled with meticulous notes, and 3 phones lined up before him: his personal cell, his work phone, and a newly purchased prepaid for sensitive calls at precisely 8 a.m. There was a knock at the door. Samuel opened it to find Eleanor Pierce, his longtime private investigator. In her early 50s, Eleanor had sharp eyes that missed nothing, and the weathered confidence of a woman who'd spent her career navigating male-dominated systems. "You made good time," Samuel said, ushering her in. "When you told me your son was involved, I was on the first flight out," Eleanor replied, setting down her worn leather briefcase. She glanced toward the bedroom door, where Andre and Jasmine were still resting. "How is he?" Samuel's carefully built, composure cracked. "Physically, he'll recover." The rest he trailed off, unable to finish. Eleanor squeezed his arm briefly, then got to work. "I've already started digging into Sky High Airways and Brenda Wilson. You're not going to like what I found." For the next hour, they pored over Eleanor's preliminary findings. Brenda Wilson had been with Sky High for 8 years, but this wasn't her first troubling incident involving black passengers. 3 formal complaints had been filed against her in the past 2 years. Alone, all dismissed after internal reviews. The complaints disappeared into a black hole, Eleanor explained, sliding over copies of confidential HR records she'd obtained through her network. "And guess who oversees passenger complaints? Richard Collins, Vice President of Security Exxon YPD, and from what my sources tell me, a man with some very problematic views on race." Samuel studied the grainy photograph of Collins, square jaw, Cold eyes, any connection to the Philadelphia PD Detective Morrison? I was waiting for you to ask. Eleanor's expression darkened. Morrison and Collins are cousins by marriage. They go fishing together twice a year. Samuel's jaw clenched. That explains Morrison's little cover-up attempt. They were still sorting through the documentation when Andre emerged from the bedroom, moving stiffly, his face pale. Seeing Eleanor, he hesitated. "Come here, Andre," Samuel said gently. "This is Eleanor Pierce. She's the best investigator I know, and she's going to help us get to the truth." Eleanor's tough demeanor softened as she approached the teenager. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you." Andre gave a small nod and made his way to the couch, curling up with his phone. Within minutes, his expression darkened. "Dad," his voice wavered. "People are saying I was violent, that I deserved it." Samuel crossed to his son and glanced at the social media feeds. Andre was scrolling through a toxic mixture of support and vicious, racist commentary, much of it parroting Sky High's official statement. "Close that app," Samuel said, sitting beside him. "Social media isn't where truth lives. We know what happened, and we have the evidence to prove it." "But they're making me sound like a criminal," Andre whispered, his voice breaking. "That's their strategy," Eleanor said, joining them. "Control the narrative, but we're going to take it back." In the following days, the Taylor family relocated to a different hotel after receiving threatening messages at their first location. Andre, once excited about college tours, now refused to leave the room, flinching at sudden noises and withdrawing from even casual contact. Jasmine took an emergency leave from her nursing job to stay with him while Samuel and Eleanor built their case. Through careful investigation, they uncovered disturbing patterns within Sky High Airways. The taser wasn't standard equipment, Eleanor reported after a discreet conversation with a former Sky High security trainer, posing as a recruiter. Flight attendants aren't issued tasers. They aren't even trained to use them. Brenda brought that on board herself, which violates about a dozen federal regulations. Samuel added the note to his growing case file, and their so-called response protocol. Total fiction, Eleanor confirmed. Their policy explicitly requires flight attendants to de-escalate incidents with minors and involve either the air marshal or captain before any physical intervention. As their investigation deepened, Samuel reached out to several major law firms, hoping to partner on the case. One by one, they declined. No one wanted to jeopardize their relationships with corporate airline clients. "We're on our own," Samuel told Jasmine one evening. "Maybe that's better. No compromises. No big firm politics." Jasmine, who had been quietly steadfast through it all, took his hand. "When have you ever needed a firm behind you? Your whole career's been David versus Goliath. This is no different. It's our son," Samuel said softly. "Exactly," she replied, "which means you'll fight harder than you ever have." The media narrative, however, remained hostile. Outlets labeling Andre as aggressive and non-compliant, even as video evidence contradicted those claims. The family soon realized they were being surveilled. During a rare meal in the hotel restaurant, Andre spotted a man photographing them through the window. Just as hope began to thin, Samuel received an encrypted email from an anonymous source, claiming to have internal information about Sky High Airways. After careful vetting by Eleanor, they arranged a discreet meeting at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of Philadelphia. The whistleblower turned out to be Olivia Martinez, a flight attendant who had worked for Sky High for 5 years. Pale and visibly nervous, Olivia slid a USB drive across the table. "There's a reason Brenda hasn't been fired," she said in a hushed voice. "She's protected by Collins." Samuel's instincts sharpened. "Why?" Olivia took a deep breath and leaned closer. "What happened to your son wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of an unofficial policy." Samuel's stomach tightened. "What kind of policy?" Collins calls it passenger management, Olivia said quietly. But it's racial profiling. There are unwritten guidelines about which passengers to watch more closely, which ones to make an example of if they step out of line. Black passengers, especially black men and boys. Top of that list, Samuel's expression remained neutral, but his hand tightened around his coffee cup and the taser. He asked. Not standard issue, Olivia confirmed. But Collins has created a special security team, flight attendants, he handpicks, ones who carry them unofficially. Brenda's one of them. Nothing's in writing, of course, but the message is clear. Samuel studied her carefully. Why are you telling me this? You're risking your job. Olivia's eyes brimmed with tears. Because I watched that video of your son, and I can't be part of this anymore. She slid a small USB drive across the table. I've documented everything I could. Emails, internal memos. Collins discussing how to handle difficult minorities. It's all on there. Samuel's jaw tightened. Thank you, Olivia. You've done the right thing. As she left the coffee shop, Samuel understood what they'd just gained. Not just a crucial witness, but evidence that could transform their case from a single, isolated incident into proof of systemic discrimination. That evening, as Samuel sat at the hotel room table reviewing Olivia's files, his phone rang, an unknown number. He hesitated a beat before answering. This is Samuel Taylor. A deep, steady voice spoke without introduction. This is FBI agent Dominic Washington. I'm calling about the incident involving your son, Andre Taylor. I think we should talk. The park bench in Rittenhouse Square, where Samuel met Agent Washington, offered little in the way of privacy, and that, it turned out, was the point. Harder to monitor a conversation in the open, Washington said. His dark suit was immaculate, despite the sticky summer heat. Samuel noted the close-cropped hair, the upright military posture. This conversation isn't happening officially, the agent warned. Samuel studied the man beside him. Why the cloak-and-dagger approach? Because Sky High Airways has friends in high places, Washington replied, his voice low. And because what happened to your son wasn't an isolated incident. I've been quietly tracking a pattern of discriminatory security practices across multiple airlines for months. Sky High's the worst offender. You're investigating them. Washington nodded. Civil rights violations in interstate commerce fall under federal jurisdiction. I've been building a case for 8 months. It's sensitive. Airline. Industry lobbyists have already tried to shut it down twice. Samuel processed this, an unexpected ally, but also a potential complication. So why reach out now? Because your son's case just cracked the window open. Those videos are too clear, too damning for the usual cover-up. But you need to know what you're up against. Richard Collins isn't just some overzealous security VP. He's implementing a systemic program of racial profiling, disguised as security protocols. It confirmed everything Olivia Martinez had told them. Samuel shared their findings, protecting Olivia's identity. Be careful, Washington warned. Collins has contacts everywhere: law enforcement, transportation, security, local media. The fact your son's already being portrayed as the aggressor in some outlets, that's no accident. When Samuel returned to the hotel, he found Jasmine watching the evening news with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Walter Green, the retired principal who'd defended Andre on the plane, had appeared on a morning talk show with his own recording of the incident. His eloquent, measured account was providing a counter-narrative to Sky High's version. I spent 30 years working with young people, Walter told the camera. I know threatening behavior when I see it. What I witnessed was a polite young man treated as a threat solely because of the color of his skin. The interview was already going viral. The hashtag truth for Andre was gaining traction online, pushing back against the airline's preferred narrative. He didn't have to do that. Andre said quietly from the doorway, watching the screen, with something like hope flickering in his eyes, for the first time since the incident. Some people still recognize injustice when they see it, Samuel said. Walter's interview seemed to break a dam. In the days that followed, more passengers from Flight 1370 came forward with their own videos and testimonies. Each one eroded Sky High's official story, making it harder and harder for the airline to maintain its version of events. The full medical report was also released, confirming that Andre had suffered cardiac stress from the taser, another blow to the airline's narrative, seizing the momentum. Samuel filed a formal federal civil rights lawsuit against Sky High Airways and Brenda Wilson, alleging racial discrimination, excessive force, and violations of interstate commerce protections. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time, it felt like they might win. Wilson and Richard Collins, the complaint detailed not just Andre's experience but alleged a pattern of discriminatory practices, systematically targeting black passengers. Sky High's first response was predictable, a settlement offer of $50,000 with a strict non-disclosure agreement. Samuel didn't even dignify it with a counteroffer. "They think they can buy our silence," he told Jasmine that night. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." 2 weeks after the incident, as the case began gaining national attention, Andre agreed to a single, carefully controlled interview with a respected journalist known for her integrity and fair coverage of racial justice issues. Sitting between his parents, Andre recounted his experience in a steady voice that only occasionally betrayed the trauma beneath the surface. "I was excited for my first flight," he explained. "I was going to see colleges I dreamed of attending. Instead, I learned that even doing something as simple as asking to use the bathroom can be dangerous if you're black in America." The interview did what no news report could. It humanized Andre. Viewers saw the thoughtful, soft-spoken honor student with dreams of becoming an engineer. They saw the loving bond with his parents, the college brochures scattered on his nightstand, all the dimensions of his humanity that earlier coverage had flattened. Public opinion continued to shift as more information surfaced. Former employees began contacting Samuel's office with their own stories of witnessing, and in some cases, being pressured to participate in discriminatory practices. Eleanor compiled their statements, carefully building a damning portrait of systemic bias within the airline. Meanwhile, Olivia Martinez's leaked documents proved invaluable. Internal emails showed Collins openly discussing how to maintain control of certain passenger demographics and implementing unofficial policies for identifying so-called high-risk travelers, criteria that disproportionately targeted minorities. Sky High's attempts at damage control grew increasingly desperate. Richard Collins personally reached out to several witnesses, suggesting that perhaps their recollections were mistaken and hinting at potential consequences for what he called false statements. It backfired spectacularly. One witness recorded the call and released it to the media, igniting public outrage and further undermining the airline's credibility. FBI agent Washington continued his parallel investigation, occasionally funneling information to Samuel through secure channels. The knowledge that a federal inquiry was underway lent weight and legitimacy to the Taylor's case. It sent a message. The government itself recognized the seriousness of these allegations. As pressure mounted, cracks appeared in Sky High's united front. A board member anonymously expressed concerns about the company's handling of the situation. Investors grew uneasy, and the airline's stock price wobbled. For Andre, the growing support offered a fragile path toward healing. The initial shock and humiliation were slowly giving way to cautious determination when Walter Green organized a small gathering of supportive witnesses and allies at a local community center. Andre agreed to attend. "I want to thank you," Andre told Walter, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "for standing up for me when most people just watched." Walter placed a firm, fatherly hand on Andre's shoulder. When we see injustice and stay silent, we become part of the problem, he said. I couldn't let that happen to you, son. The gathering was a turning point, surrounded by people who had witnessed his trauma and still seen his humanity. Andre began to reclaim his sense of dignity and worth. Then, an unexpected discovery. Jasmine, combing through old employment records unearthed by Eleanor's investigation, found that Brenda Wilson had been fired from 2 previous airlines before joining Sky High. Both terminations had involved conflicts with minority passengers, incidents that had either been ignored by background checks or, more disturbingly, quietly welcomed under Collins' security philosophy. As the lawsuit advanced into the discovery phase, Sky High hired Victoria Preston, a high-powered defense attorney known for her ruthless cross-examinations and talent for derailing legitimate claims with procedural traps. Her reputation preceded her at the first procedural hearing. Victoria approached Samuel in the courthouse corridor. I admire your dedication. Mr. Taylor, she said, offering a professional smile that didn't touch her eyes. But you're fighting a losing battle. My client's prepared to weather this storm. Samuel met her gaze without flinching. My son was assaulted for being black in America. There's no storm your client can weather that compares to what generations of our children have endured. The difference is, this time we have the evidence, the law, and the moral high ground on our side. Victoria's smile tightened. We'll see about that. The law isn't always as clear-cut as we'd like it to be. As she walked away, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling she knew something he didn't. The battle was far from over, and Sky was preparing to fight dirty. 3 days after Victoria Preston took over Sky's defense, the first sign of their new strategy appeared. A small tabloid website published an article titled, The Troubled Past of Andre Taylor. What the media isn't telling you. The piece claimed Andre had a history of disciplinary problems at school, confrontations with authority figures, and a pattern of aggressive behavior. Every word was fiction. Andre was an honor roll student, well liked by teachers who consistently praised his respectful demeanor and academic dedication. But the damage was done. The false story spread quickly through certain corners of the internet, giving ammunition to those already eager to blame Andre for what happened. They're lying about me, Andre whispered, his voice hollow as he showed his father the article on his phone. How can they just make stuff up? Samuel's fury was cold and sharp. Because they're desperate. The facts aren't on their side, so they'll attack your character instead. But that was only the beginning. Within days, more fabricated stories appeared. Anonymous sources claimed Andre had been disruptive throughout the flight. Others implied Samuel had coached his son to provoke a reaction for a lucrative lawsuit. The smear campaign soon extended to Samuel himself. Right-wing media outlets began dredging up his old cases, cherry-picking quotes out of context and interviewing former opponents eager for a spotlight. Can you believe these people? Jasmine fumed, slamming off the TV after a particularly vicious segment. They tased our child, and now they're acting like we're the criminals for seeking justice. The pressure intensified when Andre returned to school in Atlanta. Though the principal and most teachers remained supportive, some students had absorbed the false narratives circulating online. Andre endured whispers, hostile stares, and occasional outright bullying. They're calling me a liar, he reported quietly after his 3rd day back. Some kid said, I'm just trying to get rich by playing the race card. After a particularly cruel incident in the cafeteria, where a student mimicked being tased to mocking laughter, Samuel and Jasmine made the difficult decision to switch Andre to online learning for the time being. It's not fair, Andre protested, though the relief in his eyes was unmistakable. You're not hiding, Samuel assured him. You're focusing on your education while we fight this battle. Sometimes a strategic retreat is the smartest move, but the attacks only escalated. One morning, Eleanor called with alarming news. Someone broke into my office last night, she said, her voice tight with anger. They knew exactly what they were looking for. All the files related to Andre's case, gone, including my notes on our whistleblower. Was there anything that could identify her? Samuel asked, urgently. No names, but enough details that someone determined could track her down. When they tried to contact Olivia Martinez, her phone had been disconnected. A discreet inquiry revealed she had taken sudden, indefinite personal leave from Sky High. Meanwhile, Eleanor uncovered evidence that Sky High had hired a shadowy reputation management firm specializing in social media manipulation. Thousands of bot accounts were amplifying anti-Taylor narratives and attacking Andre's credibility while promoting Sky High's official statements. They're spending more to cover this up than it would cost to admit wrongdoing and make actual changes, Samuel observed grimly. Even Jasmine wasn't spared. She received notice that her nursing license was under review, following anonymous complaints about her professional conduct. Complaints that mysteriously surfaced just days after she gave a powerful interview defending Andre. Is this justice? She asked bitterly. How far should corporations be allowed to go to protect their image? The smear campaign reached Walter Green too. The retired principal, who'd become one of Andre's most visible defenders, was abruptly terminated from his part-time teaching role at a private academy. The school's official reason: budget constraints. But Walter later discovered a board member connected to Sky High's parent company had pressured the administration. They can take my job, Walter told Samuel when they met privately, but they can't take my integrity. I saw what happened to your son, and I won't be silenced. FBI agent Washington faced roadblocks of his own during a secure meeting in a public park. He explained that transportation regulatory agencies were stonewalling his information requests. Someone's applying pressure from above, Washington said quietly, tossing breadcrumbs to nearby pigeons as cover for their conversation. I've been told to focus on more pressing national security concerns. They're trying to bury this. The implications were clear. Sky High's influence extended into government oversight agencies. When Samuel confronted Victoria Preston about the increasingly underhanded tactics during a deposition break, her reply sent a chill through him. Mr. Taylor, she said smoothly, with a practiced mask of concern. I assure you, Sky High Airways conducts itself with the highest ethical standards. These conspiracy theories you're entertaining do your case no favors. Then, leaning in so only he could hear, you're swimming in deeper waters than you realize. There are bigger forces at play than just an airline defending itself. Some battles aren't worth the cost to your family. Before Samuel could respond, she walked away, leaving him unsettled and suspicious. The answer came sooner than expected. After weeks of silence, Olivia Martinez reached out through an encrypted email service, arranging to meet at a small church. During a community event, a safe, public space. I had to disappear for a while, Olivia explained, her eyes darting constantly around the room. They were getting close to figuring out I was your source. Are you safe now? Samuel asked. Olivia's bitter laugh held no humor. As safe as anyone can be when you take on people like Richard Collins. She leaned in, lowering her voice. There's something you need to know. The tasers, they're not just unauthorized equipment. They're part of an unofficial passenger control program, specifically targeting minorities. We suspected as much, Samuel said. It's worse, Olivia continued. Collins didn't develop this on his own. It was adapted from a pilot initiative by a private security firm with government counterterrorism contracts. The same profiling techniques they used on your son came from protocols designed for military use, and it's been quietly adopted by multiple airlines as part of proactive threat management since 9/11's. Samuel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. You're saying this goes beyond far beyond. Olivia nodded grimly. What happened to Andre wasn't an isolated case. It's institutional. and powerful people have a lot invested in keeping it quiet. The revelation explained Victoria's cryptic warning and the sudden pressure on Agent Washington's investigation. They weren't just fighting an airline, they were challenging an entire system, one designed to quietly treat certain passengers as inherent threats based on race. And that system would stop at nothing to protect itself. As Samuel drove home from the meeting, a black SUV pulled in behind him. He took several random turns to test the pattern. The vehicle stayed with him. It wasn't his imagination anymore. The battle had just entered a far darker phase. That night, after confirming he was no longer being followed, Samuel called a family meeting in their living room. All electronic devices were left in the kitchen, just in case. "The opposition is stronger than we anticipated," Samuel began, his voice steady but grave. "They're willing to go to extraordinary lengths to discredit us, smear our names, and make this case disappear." "Are you saying we should give up?" Andre asked, his young face a mixture of fear and stubborn resolve. "No," Samuel replied firmly. "I'm saying we need to be ready for how difficult this fight will be. They've shown they'll attack our reputations, our livelihoods, even our safety. Before we go any further, I need to know we're all in, no matter what." Jasmine took Andre's hand, then reached for Samuel's. "They hurt our son," she said softly, fire behind her words. "Then tried to criminalize him for being a black child asking a simple question. There's no power on earth that'll make me back down." Andre squeezed both their hands. "I keep thinking about other kids like me," he said quietly. "If they can do this to me, with my dad being a lawyer and everything, what happens to the kids who don't have anyone fighting for them?" Samuel felt a fierce surge of pride through his concern. Even after all he'd endured, Andre was thinking beyond himself. "Then we continue," Samuel decided. "But we adjust our strategy. They want a dirty fight. They have no idea what they're up against." The federal courthouse in Atlanta radiated authority with its towering marble columns and polished stone floors. Samuel Taylor had walked these halls hundreds of times throughout his career, but never with so much personally at stake. This was the hearing on Sky High's motion to dismiss. Victoria Preston had filed a sweeping motion arguing the case should be thrown out before trial. She claimed federal aviation regulations gave flight attendants broad discretion to maintain cabin safety, that Andre's behavior constituted non-compliance regardless of intent, and that there was no evidence of racial motivation. The case had drawn national attention. Civil rights groups filed amicus briefs supporting the Taylors. Airline industry associations lined up behind Sky High. Judge Elaine Harrington, a sharp jurist known for her meticulous legal reasoning, presided over the packed courtroom. Victoria presented her argument with practiced, polished confidence. "Your Honor," she began, "if passengers are permitted to second-guess safety decisions based on subjective perceptions of disparate treatment, the entire framework of aviation security is compromised." When Samuel's turn came, he approached the podium with calm, controlled purpose. "Your Honor, this case isn't about questioning legitimate safety protocols," he began evenly. "It's about an airline employee using a prohibited weapon on a child who did nothing but ask to use the restroom, a request that had been granted to a white child moments earlier." He methodically dismantled Victoria's arguments, citing Sky High's own policies prohibiting the use of tasers, highlighting how Andre's actions didn't meet any reasonable standard of threatening behavior, and pointing to mounting evidence of systemic racial profiling within the airline. "The question before this court," Samuel concluded, "is not whether flight attendants have authority to ensure cabin safety. Of course they do. The question is whether that authority includes the right to electrocute a black child for doing what a white child did moments earlier without consequence." When Judge Harrington delivered her ruling, the courtroom fell silent. "The motion to dismiss is denied," she declared. The plaintiff has established sufficient grounds for discovery and trial preparation. The serious allegations of civil rights violations warrant full examination. It was the Taylors' first major legal victory, and it cracked open the door for what came next. The discovery phase began, the formal exchange of evidence that would build the foundation of the trial. Sky High's legal team, so focused on character assassination and intimidation, had vastly underestimated Samuel Taylor. He and Eleanor worked with surgical precision, using the court's authority to demand internal documents and testimony. What they uncovered was damning. Sky's internal training materials contained thinly coded language describing passenger threat assessment guidelines that overwhelmingly aligned with racial profiling. Even more incriminating was an email chain revealing how Richard Collins had systematically buried complaints against Brenda Wilson and other flight attendants with documented histories of discriminatory behavior, creating a culture of impunity. As the legal battle escalated, public pressure mounted. The hashtag boycott Sky High exploded on social media. Several celebrities and public figures publicly announced they would no longer fly with the airline. Under growing congressional pressure, the FAA launched its own investigation into Sky High's security practices. Meanwhile, Walter Green, with the backing of his teachers' union, fought his unjust termination and won reinstatement with full back pay. His return was met with cheers from students and parents who rallied to his defense when the truth surfaced. The most significant breakthrough, however, came when 3 former passengers contacted Samuel. Each had experienced similar mistreatment on Sky High flights. Minor or non-existent infractions met with disproportionate, often humiliating responses from crew members. Their stories followed a disturbingly familiar pattern, and with each new piece of evidence, it became clearer. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systemic, racially charged protocol. One Sky High and its allies had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal. Samuel amended the complaint to include the new plaintiffs, transforming the case into a class action lawsuit that challenged Sky High Airways' entire system of passenger management. The media narrative shifted dramatically. Outlets that had once portrayed Andre as the aggressor now questioned the airline's training protocols and security practices. Investigative reporters dug deeper, uncovering troubling ties between private security contractors and commercial airlines, exactly the shadowy partnerships Olivia had warned about. Meanwhile, Andre was slowly healing. The trauma hadn't vanished, but with therapy, unwavering support, and the visible momentum of the lawsuit, he began reclaiming his confidence. He returned to in-person classes, where Walter Green had organized a student support group that made it clear bullying would not be tolerated. As trial preparation accelerated, expert witnesses were brought in. Psychologists testified to the lasting psychological harm Andre endured. Aviation security specialists confirmed that tasers were explicitly banned on commercial flights, and statisticians demonstrated a clear pattern of minority passengers being disproportionately targeted in Sky High's incident reports. Perhaps the most powerful evidence came from video analysis experts, who reviewed footage from multiple angles, frame by frame. Their report conclusively showed that Andre had displayed no aggressive behavior. More damning, it highlighted how Brenda Wilson's body language and positioning revealed premeditation, suggesting she had decided to deploy her taser well before any alleged threat arose. As the evidence piled up, Sky High's legal strategy shifted. Victoria Preston approached Samuel with a dramatically increased settlement offer, $5 million, coupled with a limited confidentiality agreement that would allow the Taylors to speak about the incident, but not about the settlement terms. Samuel didn't need to confer with his family. "This isn't about money," he told Victoria. "It's about dismantling a system that treats black children as threats for existing." For the first time, Victoria's polished exterior faltered. "You're making a mistake, Taylor. 5 million would set your son up for life." Samuel met her gaze evenly. "My son was already set for life. He has parents who love him, a first-rate education, and limitless potential. What he doesn't have, what no black child in America has, is the guarantee that he can exist without being seen as dangerous. That's what we're fighting for, and it's not for sale." As the trial date neared, Sky High faced a perfect storm. The company's stock price had plummeted nearly 30%. Bookings fell sharply under a growing boycott. Employee morale collapsed as workers questioned the leadership that had created this crisis in a desperate attempt at damage control. Sky High CEO Ronald Matthews held a press conference, admitting to lapses in judgment, while insisting these were isolated incidents, not symptoms of a deeper problem. "We've identified a few bad apples," he claimed with rehearsed contrition, "and we're taking steps to make sure this never happens again." But behind closed doors, Matthews was panicking. In a leaked recording of a board meeting, he could be heard shouting, demanding to know how this whole mess with the Taylor kid had been allowed to spiral out of control, and instructing his team to find something, anything, to force a settlement. What Matthews didn't realize was that his own emails would soon become the most damning evidence of all. The trial of Taylor v. Sky High Airways opened on a crisp October morning, 8 months after the incident that had forever altered Andre Taylor's life. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters, activists, and ordinary citizens drawn to a case that had come to symbolize the broader fight against racial profiling in America. Inside the courtroom, Samuel Taylor sat beside his family and legal team, his expression calm, his resolve unmistakable. Across the aisle, Victoria Preston huddled with her associates, while Sky High executives, including Richard Collins and CEO Ronald Matthews, occupied the gallery. Notably, Brenda Wilson sat apart from the corporate team, a clear signal the company intended to distance itself from her actions. Judge Harrington called the court to order, and opening statements began. Victoria went first, presenting a carefully curated narrative. She acknowledged the incident's unfortunate nature, but denied any racial motivation or corporate liability. "This case," she told the jury, "centers on a misunderstanding escalated by the unique pressures of maintaining safety at 30,000 feet. Ms. Wilson made a split-second decision based on her perception of a security threat. While regrettable, it does not constitute discrimination or a civil rights violation." Then Samuel rose. He spoke without notes, without a podium. Standing before the jury, his voice steady, he began. "This case is about a 14-year-old honor student who needed to use the bathroom, and how, because of the color of his skin, that simple request was seen as a threat. It's about a corporation that trained its employees to view black bodies as inherently dangerous, and the consequences. When that prejudice is enforced with unauthorized weapons and unchecked authority." For the next 20 minutes, Samuel laid out not just what had happened to Andre, but the broader systemic pattern within Sky High, the deliberate suppression of evidence, the targeting of whistleblowers, the manipulation of records. By the time he finished, several jurors were visibly moved. Even Judge Harrington appeared affected by the clarity and moral force of his words. The trial moved swiftly to witness testimony. Passengers from Flight 1372 described the incident in unflinching detail. Walter Green's testimony proved especially powerful. "I spent 30 years teaching young people to stand up for what's right," he told the jury. "When I saw that boy being tased for asking a question, I knew I couldn't stay silent, even when it cost me my job." The defense tried to discredit witnesses, suggesting bias and flawed perceptions. But the consistency of accounts, supported by multiple videos from different angles, proved difficult to shake. On the third day, Brenda Wilson took the stand. Under Victoria's careful questioning, She painted herself as a seasoned professional who genuinely feared for passenger safety. "In my 20 years as a flight attendant," she testified, her voice wavering, "I've never faced such an aggressive response to a simple instruction. I acted to protect my passengers." Then Samuel began his cross-dash examination. It was calm, methodical, and devastating. He walked Brenda through company protocols, which prohibited taser use on commercial flights. He pointed out the video evidence, showing Andre's non-threatening behavior. He forced her to acknowledge that she'd allowed a white child to use the restroom moments earlier, under identical circumstances. Finally, he asked, "Ms. Wilson, isn't it true that you had decided to use that taser before Andre Taylor even spoke to you?" Brenda hesitated. The courtroom fell silent. I perceived a threat," she stammered. "A threat," Samuel repeated, "from a 14-year-old boy, sitting calmly in his seat, who simply asked to use the restroom." The silence in the courtroom spoke volumes under cross-examination. Samuel began steadily dismantling Brenda Wilson's credibility. "Ms. Wilson," he began, his tone light, almost conversational. "In your 20 years as a flight attendant, how many passengers have you tased?" Brenda shifted in her seat. "Just the one incident. Just my son." Samuel clarified gently. "Yes," he nodded. "And in those 20 years, how many white passengers have you tased for asking to use the bathroom during a seatbelt sign?" "Objection. Argumentative," Victoria called out. "Sustained." Judge Harrington ruled. Samuel gave a respectful nod. "Let me rephrase, Your Honor." Turning back to the witness stand, Samuel asked, "Ms. Wilson, have you ever used a taser or any comparable device on a white passenger?" "No," Brenda admitted softly. "And yet you testified earlier that over the course of your career, you've encountered numerous incidents of passenger noncompliance. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Thank you, Ms. Wilson. No further questions." The courtroom was silent as Brenda stepped down as the trial proceeded. Olivia Martinez delivered particularly damning testimony about Sky High's internal practices. Despite Victoria's efforts to portray her as a disgruntled former employee, Olivia's detailed recollections and carefully preserved documentation of discriminatory protocols proved deeply persuasive. "We were told to monitor certain passengers more closely," Olivia explained. "The training never explicitly used racial language, but the examples and descriptions made it obvious who they meant, and there was a special response team under Mr. Collins' direction that had additional tools for managing passengers." Expert witnesses fortified the Taylor's case further, especially Dr. Eliza Bennett, a respected child psychologist who had evaluated Andre. "The psychological trauma endured by Andre Taylor is severe," Dr. Bennett testified. "To be physically assaulted by an authority figure, publicly humiliated, and criminalized for making a routine request has inflicted deep, lasting anxiety and trust issues that could take years to fully address." On the 7th day, Richard Collins, Sky High's director of security, took the stand. He projected confidence as he defended the airline's security policies. Under Victoria's questioning, he asserted that Sky High's procedures were based solely on passenger behavior, not race, and that any statistical disparities in enforcement outcomes were purely coincidental. Samuel's cross-examination began, carefully establishing Collins' background and responsibilities at Sky High. Then, methodically, he began undermining the security director's testimony. "Mr. Collins, you testified that Sky High does not issue tasers to flight attendants, correct?" "Correct. They're not part of standard equipment." Samuel approached with a document in hand. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this into evidence as Plaintiff's Exhibit 42. Judge Harrington gave a nod. "Mr. Collins, this is an email from you to the Special Response Team dated January 15th of last year. Could you please read the highlighted portion for the court?" Collins' expression faltered as he read aloud. Team members will be provided with enhanced passenger management tools, including CED devices, for use in Level 2 and Level 3 interventions. CED stands for Conducted Energy Device, correct? Another term for taser in certain contexts. Yes. And who authorized this program? Mr. Collins. Collins hesitated, glancing toward the sky-high executives seated behind Victoria. It was a collaborative decision. A collaborative decision, Samuel repeated. Was CEO Ronald Matthews part of this collaboration? Objection, Victoria interjected. Relevance. Samuel was ready. Your Honor, the defense has argued that Ms. Wilson acted independently. The chain of authorization for these weapons directly ties corporate leadership to liability. Overruled, Judge Harrington decided. The witness will answer. Collins exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. Yes. CEO Matthews approved the program. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. The implication was unmistakable. This wasn't about one rogue employee or a single security manager. It was a sanctioned, top-down program that violated aviation regulations and targeted passengers of color. The trial's climax came with surprise testimony from FBI agent Dominic Washington, who had received departmental clearance to testify after Sky High's covert program became public through the proceedings. The Bureau initiated an investigation into Sky High Airways approximately 14 months ago, Washington testified, after internal and external reports flagged an unusually high number of security incidents, disproportionately involving minority passengers. Our analysis confirmed a clear, statistically significant pattern. He continued, detailing how their investigation uncovered internal directives, altered incident reports, and a culture of unofficial profiling masked as passenger safety measures. The FBI's investigation, Agent Washington testified, uncovered a systematic approach to passenger profiling within Sky High Airways, one that specifically targeted racial and ethnic minorities under the pretense of security protocols. As Washington laid out the Bureau's findings, Victoria's objections grew increasingly frantic, but Judge Harrington overruled most of them. The evidence corroborated the Taylor's claims and went further, suggesting potential criminal violations of federal civil rights statutes. When CEO Ronald Matthews took the stand, the defense's entire strategy of pinning blame on subordinates crumbled under Samuel's relentless questioning. Matthews attempted to distance himself, shifting responsibility to Richard Collins and the Special Response Team. But Samuel confronted him with a series of damning emails, bearing his explicit approval of the very program under scrutiny. Mr. Matthews, Samuel asked as he concluded his cross-examination, his voice steady, when you authorized flight attendants to carry tasers for use against so-called problematic passengers, did it ever occur to you that one day the person on the receiving end would be a child, a 14-year-old, who simply needed to use the bathroom? Matthews had no answer. In his closing argument, Samuel turned to the jury, speaking with quiet, unwavering conviction. What happened to Andre Taylor wasn't a mistake, he began. It wasn't an unfortunate misunderstanding. It was the predictable, inevitable outcome of a system that trains its employees to perceive black skin as dangerous. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. When Andre stood up to use the restroom, just as a white child had, moments before, he wasn't seen as a student, a son, or a boy on his first flight. He was evaluated as a threat, because that's how Sky High trained its staff to see him. Samuel moved closer to the jury box, making deliberate eye contact with each juror. My son will carry the scars of that day for the rest of his life, but your verdict can help ensure other children won't bear the same burden. You have the power to send a message that no corporation can trade on our dignity, safety, or civil rights in the name of security theater. That in this country, a black child deserves the same humanity, the same respect, and the same freedom as any other child. As the jury retired for deliberation, An uneasy hush filled the room. Samuel returned to his family's side, drawing strength from Jasmine's steady calm and Andre's quiet resilience. Whatever the outcome, they had forced a reckoning that could no longer be ignored. That night, as the sequestered jury considered its verdict, the Taylors received anonymous death threats at their home. The fear was real, but for Samuel, it only underscored the urgency of their fight. The backlash itself was proof of how necessary their pursuit of justice remained. The following morning, with the courtroom packed and tense, Victoria approached Samuel one final time. $15 million, she said. No confidentiality clause. A public apology. This is the best outcome you'll get. Juries are unpredictable. Samuel, take the win. Samuel met her gaze, steady and knowing. You've seen their faces, he replied. You already know which way they're leaning. Victoria said nothing. Just then, the bailiff entered. The jury has reached a verdict. The courtroom filled with a charged electric anticipation as Judge Harrington called the court to order. The jury foreperson, a middle-aged black woman who had maintained a resolute, unreadable expression throughout the trial, rose. In the matter of Taylor versus Sky High Airways, she began, on the count of violation of civil rights under color of authority, we find for the plaintiff, on the count of assault and battery, we find for the plaintiff, on the count of negligent hiring and supervision, we find for the plaintiff, on every count. The jury ruled in the Taylors' favor. Then came the damages. We award the plaintiff $20 million in compensatory damages and $50 million in punitive damages against Sky High Airways. The courtroom erupted, gasps, cheers. The hurried scratching of pens from journalists capturing the historic verdict. Judge Harrington swiftly called for order, then addressed the defense table directly. In light of the evidence presented, I am formally referring this matter to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation, Harrington declared. The deliberate violation of federal aviation regulations, obstruction of justice, and potential conspiracy against civil rights demand scrutiny beyond this civil proceeding. As the court adjourned, Samuel embraced his family. Their fight had finally been vindicated, but Samuel knew that the true measure of their victory wouldn't be found in the size of the settlement or the future criminal indictments. It would be in the lasting, systemic changes this case would force upon an industry long shielded by vague claims of security. Later that evening, Jasmine Taylor stared at the settlement check in disbelief. 6 months ago, their son had been brutalized for asking to use a restroom. Now, the airline that once dismissed their family as a liability would never forget the name Andre Taylor. From that horrific moment on Flight 1372 to this final resolution, the Taylor family had not only transformed their own lives, they had sent ripples outward, challenging assumptions about race, authority, and justice in America. In the weeks following the verdict, the fallout for Sky High Airways was swift and unforgiving. The Department of Justice opened formal investigations into the company's leadership. Multiple class action lawsuits were filed by other passengers of color. Matthews resigned in disgrace. And under mounting public pressure, federal aviation authorities proposed sweeping reforms on security protocols and anti-discrimination mandates in air travel. The verdict in Taylor v. Sky High Airways would be remembered, not just for its financial judgment, but as a defining statement on racial justice, corporate accountability, and the enduring fight for dignity in America. Eyes. What if it happens again? He asked quietly. Samuel took his son's hand. It won't, he said firmly. And if anyone even thinks about it, you've got the whole country watching now. Jasmine smiled, brushing a hand through Andre's hair. You changed things, baby. Not just for yourself, for a lot of people. This time, you walk on that plane knowing you made it safer for the next kid like you. The next morning, surrounded by supporters, civil rights leaders, and members of the press, Andre boarded his flight. The pilot personally greeted him at the boarding door. Several flight attendants wore pins that read #Truth for Andre. Andre's seatmate, a young black girl traveling to visit her grandmother, gave him a shy, wide-eyed look. "Are you the kid from TV?" she whispered. Andre smiled for the first time that day. "Yeah," he said, "but you don't have to worry about that stuff anymore." As the plane took off, Andre gripped the armrest, but kept his breathing steady. It wasn't easy, but it was a beginning. At the congressional hearing, Andre's testimony was clear, direct, and deeply personal. He spoke not just about what had been done to him, but about the countless stories he'd heard through the foundation of travelers profiled, detained, humiliated for the color of their skin. "I'm just one person," he told the assembled lawmakers, his voice steady. "But you have the power to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." The hearing spurred further reforms. Congress passed the Passenger Civil Rights Protection Act, enshrining new safeguards and accountability measures for all domestic carriers. The ripple effects of Taylor v. Sky High Airways continued for years. The Flight 1372 Foundation expanded nationally, providing legal aid, advocacy, and education. Samuel's firm became a recognized leader in transportation equity cases. Jasmine's trauma recovery program became a model for others across the country. And Andre, though the scars would always be there, grew into a confident, passionate young man. By his high school graduation, he was already being recruited by universities and had begun speaking publicly about civil rights, youth empowerment, and healing. On the anniversary of the verdict, the family gathered at a community event in their hometown park. T-shirts reading "Justice Takes Flight" dotted the crowd. Children laughed and ran. A local poet read a piece dedicated to Andre's resilience. Samuel took the mic briefly to address the crowd. "1 year ago, we were fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. Today, this community, this country, is different because people refuse to stay silent. But this isn't the end. It's a beginning, and we'll keep moving forward together." The crowd erupted in applause. Andre stood beside his father, taller now, his expression a mixture of pride and quiet determination. He understood now that justice wasn't a destination, it was a journey, and he was ready to keep walking it. Restless, Andre shifted in his seat. "What if it happens again?" he asked quietly. "It won't," Samuel assured him, "not just because we'll be with you, but because you helped change the system. What happened to you forced people to see the truth, and that truth created real change." The next day, when Andre boarded the flight to Washington, D.C., with his parents beside him, the difference was immediate. The flight attendants treated every passenger with dignity and respect. No side glances, no suspicion, no extra scrutiny. When Andre asked to use the restroom mid-flight, no one questioned him, no one followed him, no one reached for a taser. As the plane touched down, Andre looked out over the nation's capital, the city where he would soon share his story before Congress. "We did it, didn't we?" he said softly. Samuel squeezed his son's shoulder. "You did? Your courage, your refusal to be silenced, that changed things. For people you'll never even meet." In the years that followed, Taylor v. Sky High Airways became a landmark. Case was studied in law schools, cited in courtrooms, and discussed in classrooms across the country. It taught future generations, not just about legal precedent, but about the human cost of unchecked bias. The Taylor family's life would never return to what it had been before Flight 1372. But in standing their ground, they not only won justice for themselves, they built pathways for countless others. This story reminds us of some vital truths: that justice, though difficult, is worth fighting for; that a single voice, refusing to be silenced, can expose injustice hiding in plain sight; that allies matter, that documentation matters, that courage in the face of fear matters, and that real justice isn't just compensation, it's lasting, systemic change. The legacy of Flight 1372 is a testament to the power of standing firm, speaking up, and refusing to accept the unacceptable. The Taylor family's courage teaches us that, even against powerful, seemingly untouchable institutions, accountability is possible. Call to action. What would you do if you witnessed racial discrimination, like what happened to Andre? Would you speak up like Walter Green? Would you risk your comfort to defend what's right? Your voice matters. Your action matters. If this story moved you, share it. Start a conversation. Be the person who refuses to stay silent, because the society we build tomorrow is shaped by the courage we show today.